It says we're live. Hold on. I go to my Twitter thing now. I got to keep calm. So I'm going to press this, and I'm going to discard that. This is like so exciting for me. Hold on.
There we go. We're live.
Yeah, cool. We did it again. This is my 14th time now, and I don't trust technology. And I just get so excited. It's like a Christmas present for me every time that I see that it works. So I'm really excited about it. So thank you.
Twitter always breaks down as well.
What is that?
And Twitter always breaks down as well. You never can tell.
It does. So thank you so much. This is really exciting for me.
Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, we actually started this conversation. Do you know it was almost a year ago? I was looking at some of our old messages. Did you know that?
It was a very long time ago. It doesn't feel like a long time. It was a very, lots of things happen in the year. And when lots of things happen in a year, they seem a lot faster than they are.
Yeah, I didn't realize at the time had gone that quickly. So because a year ago, I tweeted to you that you should write a book. Do you remember that?
I do remember that. I was actually writing a book while you were tweeting that to me.
Oh, were you really?
Stages of planning, but you certainly helped move it along.
Yeah. So when did you start your book? Like how long did you start your book?
Actually, my book, I'd say, I started thinking about writing a book during the James Damore scandal back in 2017. That was when I first started getting some of these sources inside, Google and a few Facebook sources as well.
Yeah.
It was right during that period. Does anyone remember James Damore, just for the context for people who don't know, was this Google software engineer who wrote a memo that he circulated inside the company objecting to what he called the groupthink and the one-party state. He said this dissent inside Google wasn't tolerated. And it was interesting, he phrased it in very sort of it was very politicized, but he phrased it in non-political terms. He said, no matter who you are, whether you're on the left or the right, groupthink isn't good. We need multiple perspectives to compete against each other. Otherwise, our products will suffer, our services will suffer, they'll grow more biased, people won't trust them. And I think Damore's been proven right over the past 3 or 4 years, although obviously there was a massive backlash against him inside Google and he was fired. But anyway, that's when I started thinking about writing a book, because for the first time ever, I suddenly got a huge number of inside sources inside Google, inside Facebook, employees who were dissatisfied with the direction of the company, who worried that Silicon Valley was giving up its old ideals of, decentralization and user empowerment.
Yeah.
But I toyed around with it for a while, and I started seriously writing it, I'd say, in late 2018.
Yeah, and now we have to go backwards, because now I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself. Would that be all right? Even though can we kind of go all the way back to the beginning?
Yep, sort of put the cart before the horse there, started talking before introducing.
Yeah.
So I'm Allum Bokhari. I'm the senior technology correspondent at Breitbart News, where I've worked for 5 years now. Published a number of scoops from inside Google. If any of you saw that 1 hour tape that went all over the media a couple of years back with the chief executives of Google and the co-founders lamenting the election in 2016, that was me. It was published in Breitbart. And I'm coming out with a book later this month, September 22nd, called Deleted: Big Tech's Battle to Erase the Trump Movement and Steal the Election. If you look in the top left corner, you'll see a link to the site where you can pre-order it. And it's sort of a political book. It's the title's a little bit political, but I think the content inside it and the stories that my sources in Silicon Valley have told me about actually really go beyond politics, because they capture a kind of moment in history when this new communications technology, the internet, is sort of shifting from a very sort of free, open, decentralized beginnings to a more tightly controlled space moderated by these a handful of monopolies. And it's interesting to look at how that happened and why that happened.
Yeah, it's amazing. And, I read the book, right? And thank you so much for giving me an advanced copy of it. And it's really an excellent book. So I knew it was going to be excellent because you've gotten so many great leaks, going all the way back, and some that were actually very significant to me in ways that you might not have known at the time. which is one of the Facebook leaks about how they were training the AI with the language and the contractors. And I don't know if you recall that because you've gotten so many.
The hate agents list that you're referring to.
What is that?
So, was that the hate agents list you're referring to when they were putting everyone on a list and monitoring? Yeah, that was an interesting one because they weren't just monitoring these people's behavior on the platform, but they were monitoring their behavior off the platform as well. So if you did something that Facebook didn't approve of on, say, YouTube or Twitter, they'd put that in the log and they'll count that against you. Even there were a few people on the list who had attended the wrong sort of political rally. Attended rallies alongside extremists, and that got them on the list as well. So,
it was really interesting because a lot of the staff that they rely on are actually contractors, and some of their own internal permanent staff also. And it really had nuances to how they incentivize and promote that type of behavior. So they're really incentivizing their employees to be kind of Javert-ish. Right, and to really have like a really dogged pursuit against these people. And I think Candace Owens, if I recall, was within a different league, was one of the people that they were kind of in hot pursuit of. So it was really interesting because it really showed the way they were incentivizing it to me as I come out of kind of a corporate executive world, the way they were incentivizing it and the way they had kind of built a whole corporate culture and structure and probably compensation structure on top of that.
Yeah, one of my Facebook sources said that a lot of employees inside the company, I guess, like the more people with more control freak personalities who like to wield power, it was very exciting to a lot of them that they were able to. Facebook gave them the ability to influence politics. Even if they weren't necessarily American citizens, they could still influence US politics by influencing the policies of Facebook. And what fascinated me about that hate agents list was the fact that there was an Australian senator, Fraser Anning, who was on it as well. And it's really interesting to see how power is shifting away, I think, from traditional power structures, elected representatives, bureaucrats, traditional national governments, and towards these giant corporations. I think if you want to affect political change these days, a lot of activists are now turning to the private sector to achieve their aims, and not to government, not to the old democratic processes. We see gun control activists turning to banks, asking them to stop doing business with gun manufacturers and gun stores that don't adhere to certain regulations. And we see people turning to Facebook and YouTube to police speech instead of turning to the government or trying to reform laws in that area. I think you just get faster results from corporations these days, and they actually wield a comparable level of influence over society that national governments do.
You said everything I wanted to say. I've got nothing else to say. That you're so right. I've been thinking about this for so many years. I started thinking about Google and about kind of the way media was suppressing things that I didn't even realize, I guess about 8 years ago, because I knew there was a humanitarian crisis, and I knew within Greece, on the island of Lesbos, where they were holding kind of an internment of immigrants as they were traveling through, and it became this huge humanitarian crisis, and it was just an enormous amount of cruelty that was going on there, and I'm pretty familiar with it. And then when I would go on Google to try and get some kind of more authoritative type of links and sources so I could show my friends and say, this is an issue and we need to discuss it, it had all been sanitized. There was nothing but like really smiling, happy faces kind of like behind these huge steel fences. And meanwhile, I knew that all the gangs that, had been roaming from Syria and from other places where they were migrating from were now all kind of congested with rival gangs, and there was a lot of torment going on, and tormentors and the tormentees going on. And then when I went onto Google, there was no reference to it. And then going into the election, I saw how much embedded Google was becoming into the Hillary Clinton campaign, into the State Department, and into the Center for American Progress. And I guess it was called Groundworks.
groundwork. That was the thing that Eric Schmidt set up to assist the Clinton campaign, and he was actually spotted at the Clinton election night party wearing a staff badge. So he was very open about his loyalties. This feeds directly into the Google tape that I mentioned earlier in the Periscope. This post-election tape of all the Google executives, Sundar Pichai, Larry Page, Sergey Brin, discussing the election on stage in front of their employees and taking questions just a few days after it. And there's one moment which I found very fascinating, which is that when I think it was Sergey Brin who says, "Well, we have no idea what the Trump administration is going to do."
I was watching it, yeah.
Right. I don't think they could have said the same thing about the Hillary Clinton win, because they had all those links. They had their guy, Eric Schmidt, deeply embedded in the campaign. They probably knew exactly what she was going to do. And I think that's probably why they were so alarmed by the Trump victory, because this was a guy they did not expect to win. They hadn't prepared for it, much like many other areas of elite society. They just were caught completely flat-footed and didn't know what to expect. I certainly think in the years since then, Google has sort of tried to like spread its influence, spread its wealth among the establishment beltway conservatives in DC. So it's certainly less of a partisan thing now, but certainly at the time they were heavily invested in a Democrat win, and had very few links to the Trump campaign.
Now, you feel that they're still very heavily invested in Trump losing, in a Democratic win.
I think Google is still, yes, more than other companies. I think it's less true for Facebook and Twitter, although they're still very they're very progressive cultures, those companies. So they're still, they tend to be centering the right a lot more than the left, those companies. But Google in particular is extremely embedded with the Democrats. There was a brilliant investigation by The Intercept, I think it was back in either 2015 or 2016, showing just hundreds of employees moving between the Obama White House, the federal government, and Google during the Obama presidency. So massive amounts of links there. And Eric Schmidt was given his job on the Pentagon Advisory Board by Ash Carter under Obama. He's been offered more positions by Cuomo in New York.
What position was he offered by Cuomo?
I can't remember exactly. It was some general sort of blue skies concept to reimagine New York after the COVID pandemic, and Eric Schmidt was invited to be a part of that. So there's certainly a sense, I think, inside Google that they're going to get a lot more contracts, a lot more influence with a Democrat administration than a Republican one.
Well, you and I are definitely in so much alignment, which is one of the things I was so interested when we were DMing a year ago, and a little bit more than a year ago now. And then when we were speaking in the last few days, and a lot of time yesterday, right, in anticipation of this, yeah. And I felt for years that we were seeing kind of the corporate becoming the country, that we were seeing, for exactly the reasons you just said, we're seeing kind of the megacorps displacing political structures. The megacorps they have an architecture and a customer service that's much more responsive. They have much more of a frequency in their touch to kind of their constituents. The experience is just kind of a better experience, and politicians don't want to deal with their electorate anyway. They just want to cash some checks and get the quick vote and kind of move on. So it was interesting watching the megacorps really displace the political structures, where there's really just not much of a political structure that's going to be left remaining. Unless you're Nancy Pelosi or Mitch McConnell, everything else is kind of very vulnerable to being displaced, being decoupled from DC power elite, certainly. And it was very interesting because within so much of your leaks, it's really the mechanisms that they employ to do that. I mean, it's just remarkable.
Yeah, the way I look at it, I think it's interesting to look at this historically, where you can sort of tell where power lies in a society based on where the lobbyists are going. So back in the pre-democratic era, in the medieval era, you'd have people called courtiers who would essentially show up at the king's court and lobby the king or the nobles to get what they want. Then in the democratic era, that changes to lobbyists. And the word lobbyist comes from the lobby of parliament, which is where all these people would assemble to gain influence with the lawmakers. But now we're seeing people trying to curry favor with these Silicon Valley companies to get what they want, and you see media companies doing that, trying to get these big platforms to suppress their competition. You see governments trying to get these platforms to carry out their policy aims, and even suppress their ideological competition. You see think tanks. Think tanks, used to be purely about influencing the government. Now they're also about influencing the tech companies. The Atlantic Council, this hugely influential foreign policy neoconservative think tank, is now helping Facebook with their so-called election integrity around the world. So all of the people who used to look to government for influence and look to government to achieve their policy aims are now looking to the tech giants, at least as well as government, if not as a replacement for government. So it's certainly a very interesting shift in power that we're living through.
Yeah.
But of course, the fascinating thing is, as Aaron Swartz said back in 2012, these companies are not. And by the way, you've got to look up this speech from Aaron Swartz. I think it was either in 2011 or 2012. He warned that corporations could ultimately pose a much bigger threat to free speech on the internet than governments, because they aren't bound by laws, they aren't bound by corporations, they don't have to protect your rights in any way. We've seen that happen over the past 4 or 5 years. He was very prescient in those predictions, and I always come back to them. And I quoted them in the book as well. They're definitely worth going back and giving a listen.
Yeah. So the thing that I'm really fascinated by is, and I even tweeted when we were discussing it right before, is that I always wonder, or I guess for the last 20 years we've been in Afghanistan, I wondered what would happen when people just got sick of it and wanted to get out and really demanded that we get out of Afghanistan and stop committing so many lives to it and stop, disrupting so much of the Middle East and so much of the world and wasting money. And, it's just a horrible thing. And what would happen? And so when I look at kind of this Trump phenomenon, I think of Trump as more of a wage earner revolt within the United States, right? Just a wage earner revolt. And also just kind of a lot of war exhaustion and just kind of lie exhaustion and feeling that there's an inaccountability. And so I see social media and the big corporations not only displacing the kind of political operation, what I call a people operating system. So I always wondered what would happen if people just said, that's it, we want an end to war. And now we know. Right? I mean, now we know. And as soon as Trump had announced that he wanted to pull troops out of Syria, then out of Afghanistan, all of a sudden, I'm a liberal, right? I'm a New York City liberal. All of a sudden, all my fellow New York City liberals everywhere around me were saying that we can't leave Afghanistan. They sounded like some, whatever, I guess. But they were like, we can't leave Afghanistan. And they gave me these really complex reasons we can't leave. These people had never heard of the Kurds. I'm like, they were telling me about like the particulars of the different lineages of the Kurds and why we can't leave now and different battles we've been engaged in. So it's just so interesting how much media has really corrupted also people's thinking about these issues and how influential it's been.
Yeah, partisanship is interesting that way. I remember during the Obama administration, there were some very interesting polls. I have to go back and find the specific ones, but they showed how public opinion really dramatically shifted. But you go back to Bush and you see Republicans supporting, was it drone strikes or bombing campaigns in very, very high numbers, and Democrats being very opposed to them. Then during Obama, Obama obviously continues the interventions, continues the drone strikes. That the Republican support for that starts to go down, the Democrat support starts to come up, and at some point they actually pass. So the Republicans become more anti-war. So there's certainly a partisan dynamic going on there. But interestingly, Obama did campaign on a platform of getting out of foreign wars and basically just escalated them, I think.
Yeah, he definitely did.
Back in 2008, I was a liberal back in 2008. I thought his anti-war message was pretty good. I certainly thought the Bush foreign policy went far too far. So I was a big Obama supporter back in 2008, but he didn't really do anything on that front. I think Trump has been genuinely dangerous to the establishment in terms of the foreign wars angle, which is why you saw the deep state push back in a way that you didn't really see with his predecessor.
Yeah, it's interesting also, and I really want to get into your book, but this is just like the conversations we were having the day before, so I'm glad we have a chance to continue it. So it's really interesting because, the deep state, I've kind of redefined what I think the deep state is. I don't think it's just kind of a lot of people who are on pensions or have kind of sweetheart deals working within government, and they've got a kind of a family ancestry of working within the State Department. It's when I see Facebook is also gets billions of dollars a year from the pharmaceutical companies. So not only have they turned a switch off against against, I guess, maybe Republican or conservative voters, where they've turned kind of that switch down. But they've also turned it down if you're have any objections to vaccines or anything else. I mean, the pharmaceutical companies are spending billions of dollars a year through Facebook because it's such an effective through Facebook groups where they can do medical, type of things. I'm really into this stuff, and I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I don't even know what it is, but I have seen them actually turn off any ability for people to have discourse about vaccines, and now that just continues with COVID. So
very anti-science, I think, because the scientific consensus always evolves. It's never really fixed. So when you're shutting down debate, you're really saying, well, there's this whole idea that the science is ever settled on any particular issue. Obviously, there are consensuses that exist at any given point, but those consensuses always shift, and you need to have open discussion and criticism to allow the consensus to shift and be questioned. So for Facebook to come in and say, okay, no more discussion, this is how it is, pretty damaging to a scientific discussion, in my view.
Yeah, and your Google leaks were really, really interesting. So I was watching the video again today because they were all doing like a group hug, I guess. Is that what they called it? A group hug?
Yeah, there certainly was a group hug at one point during that video. When I talked to Google about the video, they said, well, this is just employees expressing their opinion about the election. But what I kept thinking about is, I'm from Britain, the BBC. The BBC is expected to be this impartial, neutral, doesn't take sides or shows both sides at least. And it doesn't always live up to that ideal. It's criticized, like a lot of state broadcasters are, for being too liberal. But, if the Director General of the BBC got up on stage after a new Prime Minister was elected before the entire company and said he was very offended by the election of the new Prime Minister, he would not have a job within a few months or so. That would be unacceptable. And the BBC is an institution that has far less influence over the flow of information than a Google or a Facebook. So for Sergey Brin to go up on stage and say an election offended him is a very ominous thing when you consider the fact that there's no law, there's no regulation, there's no transparency stopping Google from interfering with elections. It certainly has the technological capacity to do so. It has a vast amount of information on voters, on undecided voters, what they're interested in, what information might change their minds. Can target those undecided voters if they want to. And this is something that goes really beyond the Trump election or Republicans versus Democrats. Do you want a company to have that, intrinsic power to influence precisely the kind of voters who might prove influential in a swing state, or might be able to carry an election, either a presidential election or even a governor's election or a congressman's election? What if there's a particularly anti-Google Democrat congressman who has a very, very small margin of victory, and Google decides, well, I don't like that Democratic congressman, they're pushing legislation I don't like, so I'm going to go and find all the undecided voters in their district, find out what they're interested in, and bombard them with information that's going to push them over to their opponent's side. Google certainly has the capacity to do that. We know they do. We know they have this vast amount of data on every individual. And I think it's, no matter where you are on the political spectrum, the idea of a single company having that amount of unaccountable power should be very disturbing if you believe in democracy and free and fair elections.
And I think a lot of people don't. And again, I see some comments here, and I want to make sure I'm responsive to. But the first one I see, thank you so much for being here, Generator 16. If Adam says your work is excellent, wow, it is excellent. It truly is excellent. I'm writing my own kind of history, but it's much different I'm very interested in this moment in time and how, what I call the fastest roll up of power in history. And it's so comprehensive that you can kind of get lost in the complexity. You can just create too many categories, or I can create too many categories, and it it just falls into a quagmire. And fortunately, that's not where I am. And also, fortunately, I have your book because I really did need that to help me better understand kind of both the smear, how all the mechanisms that they've employed, because it really is really robust. So I guess before this, it's something I've noticed, but I haven't really been able to kind of articulate. I haven't had the language for it. So we were discussing right before this kind of the smear of how legacy media has kind of become just its strength now is its ability to very loudly broadcast smears.
Absolutely, that's how it regulates behavior. And I think in some senses, the internet has taken away the power of the legacy media. Certainly that was the case pre-2016 or pre-2015 even, that blogs and independent journalists and YouTubers were sort of displacing the mainstream media. You saw back, I'd say in the period 2014 to 2018 was sort of like the golden age of YouTube, when political YouTubers were sort of attracting audiences that rivaled cable news hosts, and certainly they rivaled them in size, also rivaled them in demographics. Their audience was much younger, therefore a greater long-term potential than the cable news hosts. But it also, the internet also empowered traditional media in a very important way by amplifying the smears of the mainstream media. So when the mainstream media decides it wants to character assassinate somebody, trying to think of an good example. Take the Covington kids, right? And anything that that's written in the Washington Post or the New York Times, or even like smaller scale publications like BuzzFeed or Salon or the Huffington Post that have maybe not so great editorial standards, they're a lot more powerful than they used to be, because in the past, before the internet, you'd read a newspaper, then you'd throw it in the trash and it would get forgotten. There'd still be archives for historians to go back and see what was in the news on a particular day. But now it's going to be embedded into Google forever, and it's especially going to be embedded into Wikipedia, because what appears in Wikipedia is what appears in the mainstream media. If it doesn't appear in the mainstream media, it won't appear in Wikipedia, because those are the only sources that are accepted by Wikipedia editors as so-called reliable sources. And of course, Wikipedia, because of the nature of the site, very often appears at the top of Google searches. So this is what I call in the book, I call it the defamation engine. When a smear appears in the mainstream media, it'll then go to Wikipedia, and it'll then go to the top of Google search, and it'll be there forever. So that's an extraordinary new power that the mainstream media has that it didn't previously have. So even though the internet has weakened the mainstream media by allowing lots of competitors to emerge, it's also strengthened their ability to smear people and use that power to control behavior.
Yeah, it's amazing because you can't, because I've done a lot of my own research on other type of things, and the smears just, I wouldn't even call them lies. I don't even have the right word for what it is. It's just there's such a disconnect between thinking and reality, and it's that interference that exists between the two, because all the links that they have from Wikipedia and from everything else all say the same thing. You have to do like a really extraordinary search to be able to do kind of forensics on a smear.
Yeah, and the fascinating thing about Wikipedia is that all of its editors are completely anonymous. So you can't really do forensics because you don't know where all these citations and all these smears are coming from, who's pushing them. It could be any number of interest groups you could imagine might be operating on Wikipedia at this time. You don't know which editors are paid professionals who are just paid to stay on pages and make sure only one narrative stays at the top of Google search. We just don't know because they're all anonymous.
Yeah. And
I see someone in the chat says anyone can edit Wikipedia. Well, yes and no. I'll have to disagree with that a little bit. Wikipedia advertises that anyone can edit Wikipedia, But in reality, it's a very Byzantine bureaucracy. So ever since Wikipedia started, the rules have been just expanding and expanding and growing more and more complex because they're community-created rules. So people keep changing them and adding to them and adding new rules and so on and so forth. I the full length of the Wikipedia rulebook is something ridiculous. It would take maybe months to fully grasp. So what this does is it creates a situation where the original editors who were around at the beginning and saw those rules evolve over time have an enormous advantage over the newer editors. And also because they're an established clique now on Wikipedia, they sort of band together to keep new editors out. So yes, in theory, you can go on any Wikipedia page, create an account, make an edit, or even not create an account, just edit from an IP address. But the reality is those veteran editors who have mastered a sort of Byzantine network of rules and regulations, sort of made friends with all the other long-term editors in the system, they're eventually going to win over. If they want to delete your edit, they'll be able to do that, and you won't be able to stop them. You can challenge them, but eventually they'll win out in Wikipedia's network of courts and decision-making processes. These sort of long-term bureaucrats, the Wikipedia deep state, you might call them, will eventually win.
Oh, I like that. I'm going to call that. That's mine now. I really like that.
Wikipedia deep state.
Yeah, because there I can say it's definitely a deep state. And I don't go to Wikipedia at all. I try and avoid them because I know kind of what a moral hazard it is. But I remember the old days when I used to look at them. So I'm going to scroll around here and I just see some questions and I want to be responsive to them and see people saying hello. So one that just caught my eye and it was really funny. I used to read this so much 20 years ago. Was speaking of Wikipedia, it's like if Weekly World News was now acceptable as a source. Now you may not be familiar with Weekly World News, but what Party Through It USA said is actually really funny. Because that Weekly World News was outrageous. It was bizarre. And it would talk about how Hillary Clinton was having an affair with an alien and how Bill Clinton went up on a UFO because he wanted to kill the alien on Mars. It was just really, really great. So thank you so much for being here, Deborah Stem. And Deborah says, Google used this power to sway votes in 2018 as per Dr. Epstein.
So Deborah's referring to the work of Robert Epstein, the former editor of Psychology Today. He's really the best researcher on the effects, and I interviewed him for the book as well. He's probably the best researcher on the effects of search engines on political decision-making. He's the one who's shown that biased search results can affect undecided voters, change their opinion by double-digit margins, which is a huge, enormous amount. And he's even tested this in real elections. I think he did a test in the Indian elections a few years ago. So he's showed the enormous influence that search engines can have. And we're talking, tens of millions of votes here. And this is why the subtitle of my book is Big Tech's Battle to Erase the Trump Movement and Steal the Election. I do believe that they absolutely have the power to steal the election, to influence the vote. And this is a problem that goes way beyond Trump. It's a problem that, challenges American democracy itself. And I think 2020 is really going to be the year when we see this power used to its full, because it wasn't used to its full in 2016. I think the tech giants, like a lot of elite society, were complacent. They didn't think Trump was going to win. They didn't think they needed to do too much to stop him. And this time around, it's really going to be the revenge of the elites and using all of their power to get Biden elected. And for the first time ever, we'll see what a truly politicized Google can do.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I'm going to be responsive to this. And thank you for asking this question, Guy Mishy. So I want to make sure I answer it. Nope, that wasn't that one. Hold on. It was this one. Adam, did you get red pilled? No, because nowhere in this conversation are we really talking about GOP or Democrat, right? I'm anti-war. I want our wars to end. I think our wars are destabilizing us. And we're just creating this horrible disequilibrium, and tyrannies always turn inwards. So I want to end that. And whether that's facilitated by the Democrats or the Republicans or however it occurs, however it's facilitated, I'm with that party. And so I definitely recognize the threat of our megacorps, because I think that they're more unapproachable and unavailable than even our own political structure currently is. At least with our political structure, there's kind of a rule book, and there's something that's kind of commonly understood and that we commonly have faith in. While as one of the things that you've written throughout your book is how the algorithms just are unavailable. I think you call everything basically a black box. Everything is just a black box. I mean, there's no contribution to,
We know that there's some sort of algorithm that determines what goes at the top of the Google search results, or what goes at the top of a Twitter trending page, or Facebook's newsfeed. But we have no idea how these companies make those decisions. We can't see behind the curtain. And certainly in the past, there was some objective criteria that went into it. The Google search results will be determined by a mix of what's relevant, what's new, what's popular. But we know they've been adding political considerations, because back in 2018, I obtained the YouTube controversial query search blacklist, or at least I obtained some of it. I obtained some of it actually as Zachary Voorhees, who's just here, a very brave Google whistleblower, obtained most of it and then published it. But that was where they were essentially taking this file and adding search terms into it. And as soon as they added the search terms into it, and these are very politicized search terms, by the way, we're talking about search terms like abortion, like Federal Reserve, even the names of political candidates. And as soon as they added those words to the list, it completely reordered the search results on YouTube, so that only verified, pre-approved sources from that YouTube had vetted would appear at the top of search results. So we know they are manipulating political search results. We just don't know how widespread it is, or how the technology really operates.
So it's interesting, and thank you so much for being here, Zach. I'm going to schedule with Zach, but I'm really excited to have a discussion with Zach. This stuff is just so interesting to me. I've always been a bit of a futurist, so I can't really say much of this is kind of a surprise to me. In a way that I would not have expected. I just could not have imagined it like this. I couldn't have imagined it as much violence as we're seeing now. And I expected a lot of violence, but I couldn't imagine as much coercive force, as much disruption, really as much cruelty as we're seeing now. I knew that, the Democratic Party now being kind of a home for a lot of the neocons, I guess, or now being very welcoming and very congeniality to the Max Boot and everything else. I knew that they were going to have difficulty kind of retaining their kind of legacy base. I didn't expect them to kind of employ some of the measures that they've taken to really try and regain some of the lost voters. I didn't expect them to be as forceful on the constraints of speech, really, as what we saw in Europe. So within Europe, I was watching what they were doing for the last 10 years. It's hard not to. And I was just thankful that it wasn't happening here. And now I see it happening here with as much force and velocity as happening there. And there's also, I'm kind of a bit of an expert, I suppose, within parts of China, within the finance, within the culture, in certain parts of it, particularly in the finance and certain operations within it. I didn't expect to see their social credit system so quickly be used as kind of the template to be rolled out here. While it's there, they can just kind of lay the hammer down and say, this is the system that we have now. It's a social credit system. Get over it. This is the way things are. You have to go to a camp. Within America, they had to be much more sneaky. They've had to kind of deliver it into our system in a less overt way. But because it's not as overt, there's less. You don't see what the rules are. The rules are not explicit. While as in China, the rules are explicit. Don't say this, and you'll stay out of jail. In America, the rules aren't as well defined. There's no rules to the game. You're just kind of playing by their rules, and the house always wins. So I'm really looking forward to that conversation with Zach as well, because he's been a part of that unraveling of Google.
Zach is one of the greatest Google whistleblowers, in my opinion. He released so much great information from inside the company, and it was a very courageous thing to do. So thank you to Zach for that.
Yeah, I know. And why do you think that we're not seeing, and this is both of you actually, why do you think it is that we're not seeing more? Is it just kind of a professional career insecurity? Or are we just seeing this endless kind of a loop, just this endless self-referential loop?
Well, I think Google got a lot more careful about leaks after 2017, 2018, and sort of early 2019 when all of those big leaks were released, because it was sort of a victim of its own very open internal culture, which in which employees from all parts of the company were allowed to basically discuss almost anything. You could search for anything inside the company. It's sort of like the company culture of Google is like the opposite of Apple. Apple is, and notice you don't see many leaks from Apple. In Apple, everything's very compartmentalized. Not a lot of communication between the various departments. Inside Google, on the other hand, everyone communicates, which created, when Google became politicized, it's created the perfect environment for leaks, which is why we were able to learn so much about the company, which was very good that we did. This is Google is, a company that loves to know absolutely everything it can about all of our lives and our interests. It was good that we were able to see inside the company and learn what they're interested in, what they're doing as well. But you said a couple of interesting things. First of all, you mentioned Europe. And I think Europe is an interesting contrast with America, because in America, I think the reason we see people turn into the private sector, turn into corporations, and especially the left at the moment, there is a bit of a political divide here, is because you still have the Constitution. You can't just regulate speech. You can't use the government to clamp down on speech you don't like. And especially the establishment needs to clamp down on speech at the moment, because the internet did allow this window for genuine challenges, genuine threats to the establishment to emerge. I'll get into a bit more of that in a second. But in Europe, you don't have a constitution. So what you saw was governments sort of remaining dominant, taking control of social media, passing laws, making social media platforms enforce their speech regulations and do what they wanted them to do. So I think in Europe, the relationship between social media platforms, big tech companies, and the government is very much on top. But in America, it's less clear.
I want to take some more questions because I see some really interesting things here. And first, let me say hello to Rising Serpent. So thank you so much for being here. Namaste. And they ask, is there such a thing as blockchain search engine?
That's fascinating. I actually haven't heard of a blockchain search engine. I have heard there was a blockchain alternative to Twitter in development at some point. I think it was called Twister. I'm not entirely sure what happened to that. Blockchain search engine I haven't heard of at the moment, no. I know some people have discussed it as a concept, but I'm not sure if one currently exists.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I would be interested in kind of a Twitter alternative that's like on a blockchain or something, because Twitter needs kind of that mass that it's got right now, and it needs that intellectual weight that it's got right now, and it needs kind of some filter of bad content, right? Content that I just don't want to see. And so I understand there's different ways of doing it with federated nodes and stuff like that, but that's kind of burdensome. I like the system as it works. I would just like there to be more transparency. I'd like interrogating an algorithm kind of to be a human right.
I think you can arrive at a happy medium, and I think I was actually on a press conference call with a debate between a guy at the NTIA, which is doing this Section 230 petition before the FCC, and another law professor who I think is Google funded and disagrees with any and all Section 230 reform. And the NTIA guy agreed with that with something that I've championed for a long time, which is that the end game, if you do believe in maximizing user choice on these platforms, is to you can have all the current content filters that they have. You can have the fake news as a category, hate speech as a category, all these filters, but you just have to make them opt-in. You just have to have buttons that users can conveniently switch on and off. And then you can still have a very convenient system where you're not making the decisions about what to filter. Someone does that for you, someone curates for you, but you decide whether you switch the filter on and off or not. And Google has done this for a long time with the safe search button. That's what you press if you want to filter out obscene results. That's worked very well for a very long period of time. They could very easily do the same thing for hate speech or for fake news. They just don't want to, because I think they want to retain that control over the flow of information. And I think political elites also want them to retain that control, because just to go back to what I was saying earlier, there was this window, I think, and I think it was probably between, say, 2010 and 2016, when the internet really did disrupt the old gatekeepers of information and allowed the space for these populist movements to emerge that genuinely were threatening to different parts of the establishment, whether it's the deregulation, free market establishment. I think the rise of the Corbyn movement and the Sanders movement, not necessarily Sanders himself. I know you have some objections there. That was genuinely threatening to the free market establishment, and also the foreign policy establishment. This was Trump, this was Brexit, the whole international globalist order. The internet did create that window for populists. Where was I going with this? I think that's why you don't have these sort of these filter buttons, because even though they'd be very easy to implement, even though Google already has a version of them in the form of safe search, they simply would take power away from elites and give it back to users, and I think elites don't want to do that.
Yeah, it would certainly disrupt the those feedback loops, right? And clearly they don't want to allow people to restore their own kind of mind state and equilibrium. So they've got to keep you, continually off balance and taking up as much real estate in your mind as they can. So I suppose allowing people to kind of subtract all those type of things would give people a vacation, a mental vacation, and they certainly don't want that to happen. So then,
how do we fix Wikipedia? This is an interesting question. I think there was someone earlier in the chat who compared Wikipedia to, what was it, World News Daily, or one of those.
Weekly World News.
I actually think it's worse, because a traditional publisher like World Daily News, you can still sue them for defamation, right? If they publish something that's a complete smear that really damages a reputation, you can take them to court and sue them. Whereas Wikipedia, I think, is by far the most, and just to make the obvious comparison, Wikipedia is meant to be a decentralized version of Encyclopedia Britannica. You can still sue Encyclopedia Britannica. They're not protected by any law that gives them a liability shield like every tech company has. It's absurd to me that Wikipedia, easily the most powerful publisher in the world, the publisher that appears at the top of nearly every Google search result, cannot be sued for defamation. That's crazy. It's not a platform, it's a publisher. And when you have that much power over people's reputations, you need to be able to hold them accountable. So why is the Encyclopedia Britannica allowed to be sued for defamation, whereas Wikipedia isn't? That's the state of the law right now. So I think to fix Wikipedia, you need to impose that level of traditional legal accountability on them, so they can't simply publish whatever they want about people, no matter how damaging it is to people's reputations.
Now, earlier, we were discussing Carol Davidson. I think we were discussing her yesterday. We were discussing it for quite some time. So can we go back to Carol Davidson and continue with?
Yeah. I think you mentioned some other individuals who made similar points. So Carol Davidson was a very senior member of Obama's campaign team in 2012. She worked directly with Facebook and on their social media campaigns. And way before Trump, she was, after she left the Obama campaign, she was giving these lectures that were on YouTube. You can still go and find them, about how dangerous it was that Facebook allowed the Obama campaign access to the entire social graph. And what the social graph essentially is, you have, let's say you have one person who gives permission to the Obama campaign to, send out messages and collect their data. Back in 2012, what that meant was, if one person did that, the Obama campaign got access to all of their friends' data as well. And this is what Cambridge Analytica was accused of doing, but the Obama campaign in 2012 essentially did it on a much larger scale and with the explicit approval of Facebook. Carol Davidson said that people from Facebook even came to the Obama campaign HQ after election night in 2012 and said they allowed the Obama campaign to do things that they wouldn't have allowed other people to do because they were on the quote-unquote same team. So this has been going on for a very long time. And
I think Mika Sifri and Zeynep, and we were discussing them as well, because in 2012, I was also observing that, and they were doing a lot of commentary on it, how instructive Facebook was into making that, using the version 1.0, which was since deprecated right afterwards, but how how instructive they were. And I was walking you through it yesterday in making it just a very seamless experience for that Facebook user. You would click on, you would see which other of your friends are also engaged with the Obama campaign. And as soon as you clicked it, you gave them all your friends' names, and then it radiated outwards. And it was just a very easy sign-up experience. So I am now seeing the same thing on Facebook. I never go on Facebook. I actually saw the same thing recently. I think it was today. I was on Facebook, maybe yesterday, and it seemed to me that they were kind of replicating that same type of user experience, except here was a little bit more implicit. They were like, have you registered to vote yet? Have you done this? And I then went to the Facebook integrity political team, the bipartisan, whatever it is on Facebook that kind of regulates this, I suppose. It's called the bipartisan integrity thing. And I was very curious about who the scholarship was behind it and who were the people that were involved with it. And one of them is on Kamala Harris's team, I guess. I think that's the head of the thing, or the head research person is on Kamala Harris's team. So I see a difference. So after version 1.0, that graph was deprecated, it was still very destructive. And I met with the Cambridge Analytica team. So on a venture capital note, I met with them. I was so unimpressed with them. I didn't know the Trump campaign was using them. It showed a little bit of sloppiness, perhaps even that they engaged with Cambridge Analytica, because their stuff was horrible. So they definitely got a good rep. They got a good rep, and they were horrible. They were just a horrible shot. So Ron Coleman is here. Ron Coleman first, and thank you so much, Ron, for being here. It's very thoughtful. First, he says, great point about Wikipedia. And prior to that, he says, Ron Coleman says, so this is a paradox. Filtering would empower independent users and voicers and not the opposite.
So I think opt-in filters would. We already have filtering. Obviously, we have, top-down censorship of hate speech, top-down censorship of so-called misinformation. My sort of end game, really, well, not an end game, but a vast improvement on the current system would be to simply make all those filters opt-in with a little button similar to Google's Safe Search. You'd obviously still have a lot of conflict and arguments over who gets categorized as, hateful or spreading misinformation, and who gets placed behind those filters. But it would be a huge improvement simply to make those opt-in for users rather than have them imposed on everyone by the platforms.
And then here, and thank you very much for that. And here, Deborah Stemmen, thank you so much for being here, Deborah, says there is no incentive for the political class to hold any tech platform accountable in any way.
That's absolutely right. Well, I think if you with an inactive grassroots, that's certainly the case. The only thing I've seen Republican politicians respond to in this area is pressure from the grassroots. Republicans were not responding to the censorship issue or taking it seriously until the grassroots made them take it seriously. Before Zuckerberg came to testify before Congress for the first time, it was actually because of the Cambridge Analytica scandal, which, by the way, is amazing to me. It kind of shows you how savvy the Democrats are about these sorts of issues.
I bought the stock in the scandal, just so you know. I think the stock was at 130 or something. It's now almost 300, 295. I bought the stock knowing that it was going to permit greater consolidation of Facebook power, because now they were going to be the sole gatekeeper as opposed to relying to all these kind of outside agencies that were kind of middlemen brokering Facebook info.
Right, that's pretty smart. I wouldn't have predicted that myself. But back in, where was I going? So Zuckerberg was hauled before Congress, I think, for the first time in 2018. It was before both houses, the Senate and the House. And first of all, the Republicans controlled both houses at that point, and it's amazing to me. And again, it shows you how further ahead of the Republicans that the Democrats were on these tech issues. They were able to get Zuckerberg before Congress on the Cambridge Analytica issue, whereas Republicans did not show similar initiative in bringing the tech companies before Congress on the censorship issue at any time before that, even though they controlled both houses. But one of the things that stuck out for me during that hearing was, for the first time ever, we saw people like Ted Cruz and other politicians taking Zuckerberg to task over censorship. And I can't remember which lawmaker it was exactly, but they said that they got more letters from constituents about the censorship issue than any other issue ahead of that hearing. So the one incentive for the political class to hold tech platforms accountable is the grassroots. So this is why I always say whenever we're on a conservative talk show that taking money from a big tech company needs to be as unacceptable to the Republican grassroots as taking money from Planned Parenthood. And I certainly hope that the Democrat grassroots take a similar approach, because these companies are threatening to all of American society, all of American liberties, no matter who you are, no matter where you are on the political spectrum.
Well, I've been persuaded for many years. I guess now it's been my theory, kind of at least 10 years, maybe 20 years, is that the megacorps were kind of taking over. So I'm fascinated. And although it's kind of impossible, I suppose, to be, I try and be a disembodied intellect. And rather than be offended at every single place and get outraged, I don't really allow myself to emotionally engage in any of this. And I just watch all of this. So I was not surprised to see kind of the passiveness in which Congress treated Zuckerberg. I thought it was good for campaign solicitations, but it wasn't, to me, persuasive in any way, because they have so much enforcement ability on Google in terms of inversion taxes. And there's just so many ways that they could really prosecute Google or Facebook or any of them, Uber. And a lot of them do the same thing. So part of your book, the later part, is really about kind of some of the other mechanisms that they employ, both to permit anonymity, but also to kind of pierce the veil of anonymity, which is like, screen captures, key logging, just a lot of ways that they can kind of synthesize all the information they're capturing and kind of figure out who you are and then micro-target you. And
yeah, so this is one of the scariest things I discovered from my sources. I talked to someone who worked in ad tech, and ad tech companies, they're the companies that sort of gather mass amounts of data and use it to develop profiles on people so they can better target them with ads. They have a huge incentive to unmask anonymous commenters or people who use pseudonyms on the internet and then match those posts to their real identities. Because the more they can do that, the more they can find out about those people, the more they can target them with ads. So what this means essentially is that if you're the type of person who goes on anonymous comment sections, whether that's YouTube or websites, go on Reddit or even 4chan or places like that, don't assume that whatever you post is going to be either anonymous or transient, because it's entirely likely that even a post that disappears in a few days will, before it disappears, be scraped by one of these ad tech companies, put in their database, and then run through their systems to match your writing style to say your Facebook post under your real name. And by the way, the technology to do that, to match writing styles to identify people, absolutely exists. In fact, J.K. Rowling, when she tried to write under a pen name for a while, when she branched out beyond Harry Potter to write sort of adult thrillers, when people suspect that the pen name was actually J.K. Rowling, what they did was they sent one of these books to a computer scientist. I can't remember the exact university, but he essentially just ran it through a program, and it identified the pseudonymous writer as J.K. Rowling within 30 minutes. Yeah. So the technology to unmask you if you write anonymous posts on the internet absolutely exists. There is a bit of hope here, because if the technology to unmask you exists, the technology to conceal you also exists. So I think the people who value privacy need to get together and start building technologies to actually mask your sort of unique giveaways in your post. It could even be a browser extension that automatically changes your writing style. But certainly at the moment, you wouldn't count on any existing pseudonym or anonymous service to be truly anonymous.
And then the flip side of that is they can kind of break up netroots movements. Like, they've clearly done a very good job of dismantling the Trump netroots movement. And a lot of, your book is really about how they focused on kind of the Trump voter, right? Kind of what I call, again, it was a wage earner revolt and kind of war exhaustion, that they really wanted to grassroots them out and instead reassemble their own grassroots which is what we're seeing now, I suppose, where they've kind of reconstituted to one that has a real potency to take down wars or to keep Trump elected, to one that is essentially politically impotent. And so they can kind of micro-target and dismantle the Netroots movement, and at the same time, they can assemble their own grassroots movements and mobilize them.
Yeah, and it's kind of hard to remain dispassionate here because it really was a remarkable period in human history, the early age of the internet. This was genuinely an unprecedented era of freedom of information, where all you need to do to access a global audience or build a new political movement was to have a laptop and an internet connection. Whereas that's been entirely taken away over the past 4 or 5 years. If you want to build a political movement today or build a following, you need the implicit approval of these tech platforms. You can't get on their bad side or the bad side of their algorithms. So the way the mechanisms work, the way the mechanism of censorship works, is that these companies will decide there's a certain type of person they don't want on their platform. They're gonna look for the way those types of people talk, the kind of words they use, the kind of references they use, the kind of sites they link to, and they're going to use that to build a model of a user. And then they're going to train their algorithms to look for people who are similar to that model, and the algorithm will then either ban them or, more likely, just covertly suppress them, make sure their posts don't go viral, that they don't get seen, that they aren't able to form those connections and those organic movements.
Or they can amplify them and create this kind of homophily where now your network is just growing by like-minded. And I think in the prologue, I guess the beginning part where you're talking about Reddit and or actually I suppose it was the Trump people from Reddit, the Donald or something. That was really, I was not expecting it to be that interesting in terms of the Donald part because I'd only been there once or twice. So I didn't really know what that experience was and what that was like. It was really interesting the way in which they kind of demobilized, how thoroughly they really infiltrated the Donald. I guess is that what it's called, the Donald? And then how they essentially got them banned because of the number of upvotes or something. Ultimately, they said that there was too many upvotes or
they accuse them of what they call on Reddit brigading, which is when people from one part of Reddit, one community, go and brigade another community and upvote and downvote content, essentially penalizing certain communities for being too effective. And of course, some communities that are liked by the administrators are allowed to get away with it, whereas others, like the Donald, are not. And that's a perfect example of a huge grassroots community that was extremely influential and powerful in spreading memes and spreading messages in 2016, just completely erased before the next election.
Yeah, and memes.
But the more insidious thing is less high-profile bans like that are out in the open. You kind of see the bans, but more what I was saying earlier. There's sort of covert models they're building on people on the type of users that they don't like, that then covertly censor everyone at the same time. Because the thing about an algorithm is that it'll scan everyone's posts. It'll leave no one out. So if you're in any way similar to the types of users that they don't like, the algorithm will pick that up and it'll suppress you.
I'm really worried about what happens when all of our cars are powered by those same algorithms. It's going to, what happens then? I mean, they could kill you if they wanted to. They can just drive you right off a cliff. They can frame you for a murder if they wanted to, and make it seem like you ran a person over. There's so much that they can do, and it's a bit of my science fiction thinking, but there's a lot that they can do, and it's very interesting to me, right?
Yeah. It'll make Epstein situations a lot easier.
What is that?
Will make Epstein situations a lot easier.
Oh yeah, definitely. Especially when he's got an algorithm in his bone and they can just automate his hiatal bone to like break itself. That'll be really interesting. So how can Facebook, and thank you again, Rising Serpent, for being here. Namaste. How can Facebook talk about banning campaign ads while playing a central role in election campaigns?
Well, it can't. This is the key. I'm not sure how to describe it. This is it's a very interesting thing that they're pulling off here, because the whole media has been focused on over the past 4 years on Facebook allowing misinformation and so-called election interference to happen on its platform. But the greatest potential for election interference comes from the companies themselves, not from Russians or from fake news sites or from hyper-partisanship or any of these things. The companies themselves, and there's no law, no regulation, no oversight preventing them from using that power at the moment. We just have to trust their good faith, which they haven't really demonstrated over the past 4 years. So, in my view, they actually can't really talk about that at all, but they do nonetheless.
It is amazing. So, because I wanted to allot for an hour, running a little bit over, so I'm going to give you kind of like a lightning round. I've been really selfish because I've been talking a lot about, if we were just having coffee, these are the things we would talk about. So thank you everybody for permitting me at times to ask a question that was a bit off. So Valis Watson, and thank you so much for being here. The only thing to be done with Wikipedia is to educate people as to its real purpose. Is that a solution? Is that something
it certainly helps. I mean, I think most high school teachers today will still tell their students, do not cite Wikipedia, it's not reliable. And that's absolutely correct. And that couldn't be more correct with regards to political controversies. So yeah, just tell people it's unreliable because it is.
That's interesting. I never use Wikipedia. I think I've seen the site maybe 100 times in my life, maybe more, but it seems to me that I can recall maybe not that much. I'm very anti-Wikipedia. I've always been it since I bumped into their founder at a couple of political fundraisers. I was a bit shocked to see that and some other things. Leslie Shea, very wise to be a dispassionate observer. Yeah, it keeps me young. It really does. So thank you. It does. It really does. And I'm just going to skip through, so I'm not quite sure what they are yet. Generator 16. Haven't the megacorps always owned the U.S.? How else do we understand the Gulf of Tonkin or World War I? Do you have a response for that, Alan? Because that's a...
Well, there's certainly something interesting about the structure of the US with its constitution and separation of powers that deliberately makes political change kind of slower than it is in other countries. Say, in parliamentary systems where you have the unitary legislative and executive, you can have change a lot faster. So I think people in the US tend to turn to the private sector because they can't get change quickly enough from the government. So that's both a strength and a failing of the system, depending on how you look at it.
And I would say that they've always been fused. Megacorps have always been fused to the government. Our system was designed, particularly over the last 100 years, so that the megacorps, because they had the largest number of employees on their payroll, it was just much easier to capture taxes from them because of the payroll frequency biweekly or weekly, whenever it was done. So there was also a convenience and an efficiency to being able to capture taxes that way. There was just such a tether between the two. And now that we've seen Obamacare or ACA, we've seen kind of a decoupling and untethering between the employee and the corporation they work for. I think that has changed, and I think it's really unburdened both the balance sheets of the megacorps and politically the need to keep up a facade that they had to do before. So I think that there's always been a fusion throughout history. I suppose there's been a fusion, but I think now we're seeing the megacorps under kind of the cloak of resistance really displace our
And by the way, just to go back, Generator 16 mentions Gulf of Tonkin or World War I. I actually go a step before that, the Spanish-American War, because there's I make the comparison between the rise of social media platforms and the rise of mass literacy and the mass print media at the end of the 19th century. And one of William Randolph Hearst's famous quotes was, you furnish the pictures and I'll furnish the war. The war party has always had a really huge vested interest in maintaining control over the flow of information. And I think that's why the deep state, which really goes beyond left and right, has been really threatened by the internet.
Yeah, your book is really good. It really is. I want to emphasize that, and not in a sales type of persuasion way. It really is a good book. So for a lot of the times that I read Trump, which really isn't that much throughout the book, actually, you're really talking about kind of the operating system of these tech companies and giving it a lot of historical reference as well as you discuss a lot of the leaks that you've gone through. So a lot of times when I see Trump's name, I just think of anti-war. I just think that they're kind of ending any type of opportunity for sustained resistance to the ending of war. So Nate Snyder, and thank you so much for being here, Nate, asks, how do deepfakes fit into our future for social media? The potential for instability is huge.
Well, I think that's actually a positive element to deepfakes, which I hadn't considered until recently, which is I was talking with one of my contacts. He's an investor, and he's very bullish on the pseudonymous economy. He believes that eventually we will get anonymity back. That technology to make ourselves anonymous will, start to proliferate again. And actually, deepfakes are one of the ways in which we'll be able to remain anonymous, because he predicts that in the future we'll essentially have these online personas that we'll be able to even have Zoom calls or Periscope calls like this with completely different identities and different faces, different voices even. You wouldn't know who we are. And I think that's actually, you can say there's a potential for instability there, but there's also potential to get around the kind of cancel culture.
Yeah.
It's very dangerous that we're losing anonymity at the same time that cancel culture is growing so strong. Even the founding fathers, used anonymity to their advantage to discuss the Constitution, because they could make arguments they couldn't make under their real identities. So anonymity has always been valuable for political debate, for challenging old taboos, old conventions, old consensus. And I think if deepfakes can help us regain some anonymity, that would be a good thing.
Antonio Reese, LA, and thank you so much for being here. Says create a movement to click on AdWords and never buy anything. I don't know whether that would be effective, though. I'm pretty familiar as an investor with some of the companies, although it's never been a space I've invested in deliberately. Although the funds I have probably have, and I don't think that works. They're very, very deep, and it's that's not going to be effective unless. What's your feeling on that?
Yeah, I couldn't really speak to that. I'm not. You're probably more of an expert on this than me, but certainly they're very good at detecting that kind of manipulation, I think. So it's a good thought, but probably wouldn't sink them.
Yeah, and then so McCad guy, and thank you so much for being here. And please tell me how you like those great courses books, those great courses series. I know you and I have both enjoyed them. When do they go after the financials based on social credit score? It's not a social credit score, it's a social credit system. And there's really quite a difference. And I've written a lot about it. And one of the reasons I've been writing about China so much on Twitter and kind of distilling my own internal notes from my family office is so that people could have a much better view of how they were a leading indicator. So everything that you're seeing in China is really a leading indicator for what's happening here. And I can talk about TikTok, and I can go back to talk about Yiming, who was the founder of ByteDance, and his relationship to the Chinese Communist Party. And there's just so many things to talk about. But long story short, their system is ideal for their people operating system over there. And what we're employing here is kind of this makeshift megacorp oligarchs battling it out. But eventually it gets pretty close. I don't think we're going to have the physical coercion. We're never going to have the physical coercion, the implied violence that China always has. There's always an implied threat of violence in China. So I want to make sure that I'm scrolling through everything.
On the credit score point, one of the things one of my sources talks about in the book is how every social network will give its users a quality score. And if that quality score drops below a certain point, then you're off the platform. And Uber and Lyft and PayPal and all these companies will have a similar score for their users. And originally that score was, just to, sort out spam bots and, people who post malware links from regular users. But now, of course, is they're bringing in considerations of hate speech and all these other political considerations as well. So I think Silicon Valley absolutely does have a social credit system. It's just decentralized. And it's going to get really interesting when these companies start sharing their scores on their users, because then it becomes very difficult to escape.
Well, we have a different people operating system here. It's really not ideal for, to have this conversation now. but we just have a much different people operating system. There's the Chinese Communist Party kind of takes over the businesses. The businesses just become this kind of facade after a while. And while as within hours, the businesses take over the government apparatus. So these are actually very, very big differences. They have what I think Julian Assange called, we have a fiscalized system. I think he once described our own system as, which is I've heard before, and I think it's really accurate. They have a much more political type of system where...
Yeah, it's like financial penalties and damaging your reputation in business versus throwing you in jail, right?
Yeah.
That's one of the big differences.
And they only have one political party. So when there's volatility in it and you have turnover, you have real turnover. You have dynasties and really, whole families that turn over. It's a real turnover of power. While in here, you can just vote for the other party. So,
although I will say it's an interesting question whether the penalties imposed by a state are more severe than the penalties that can be imposed by a corporation. I know that Count Dankula, he's this comedy YouTuber who was put on trial in the UK for hate speech. He was fined, I think, £800 by a Scottish court. But then a year or so later, YouTube totally demonetized his account. And the demonetization of the YouTube account was a much bigger blow to him, I think, than the £800 fine.
Yeah, it's still different. You don't get tortured. Your family doesn't get sent somewhere to the Rust Belt and disappear. I mean, there really is a difference. China is not America over there, but just a little bit different. I mean, it really is just structurally different. And I want to thank you again. We went overtime. It's an hour and 16. I had such a good time. I really enjoyed your book so much.
Well, thank you, Adam. Thank you for inviting me. It was a great conversation. And thanks to everyone for stopping by as well for their great questions.
And then so Deborah asked, what's the name of the book? And that's, right before this, I spent so much time creating some banners for it. So I'm going to make sure they go up right now. So in closing, first we'll see. And I spelled Allum your name wrong. I'm so sorry. I could change that on the fly. But let me see if I can actually change that on the fly. I think I can. So Allum, I apologize for spelling your name wrong there. Now
there you go.
So I got an advanced copy of your book. And because I'm an extreme salesperson, and that part of my Twitter bio is so me. It would be the first thing I'd put there. Is I try not to. I try and hold myself back because otherwise I just get very passionate and emotionally kind of persuasive. Your book really is excellent. Your book genuinely is excellent. I really was just so pleased with it. It's interesting. I had forgotten. I had forgotten about all the leaks. I had forgotten about the Candace Owen things. I forgot about the Ted Cruz. I forgot about that whole festival that Google did when the day after or the week after the Trump won. It was kind of a morning festival. I had even forgotten some of the other things that maybe you had even forgotten in advance of the book was how. People were complaining that any criticism of the Federal Reserve should be kind of withdrawn from Google search algorithms.
Keep up the YouTube search result. I think that's what it was. And it was Chris Hayes doing that.
Yeah, that was exactly right. I had completely forgotten about that. And it just shows you that they don't want people complaining about fiscal policy. They don't. They just do not want dissenters. So there was so much that I had forgotten that just really documented so much of this history of social media since Trump's election. And as I've said before, I think you're really the best and really perhaps the only person who's chronicling social media and social media's kind of perniciousness. Just it's how it's creeping along and just removing dissenters and just changing it out. You've done such a good job of it. The leaks have been so fantastic. So again, thank you for for contributing to the history that I'm writing because it's so helpful, and to the history that the world is experiencing. Your book really does such a great job of that. So thank you again.
Well, thank you, Adam. It was great to be on. It's a wonderful discussion, and thanks to everyone who stopped by.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And Sierra Foothills, Galen, thank you so much for being here. Says she's ordering the book. Genuinely, I'm very interested So please do order the book. I think it comes out in a week and a half, isn't that right? September 22nd.
September 22nd, yes. You can pre-order it now on Barnes & Noble or Amazon.
Yeah, and the cat guy also said the same thing. And my last recommendation, to that we shared was Machiavelli, and it was the great courses, Machiavelli in Context. And I know you enjoyed that because I really enjoyed that as well. So I'm really happy that you enjoyed that. And Rising Serpent, thank you. So, this has been very instructive. I look forward to reading your book. Good, I'm glad. And please, again, Rising Serpent, and you're very influential on Twitter as well. So I'm very interested, and all of you are. And I'm very interested in everybody's comments on the book. It's such a fascinating subject, and nobody's chronicled it. The people that I would have relied on chronicling this, such as Zainab and such as Mika and some of the other kind of scholarly and the academics who have been going through this for 15 years, none of them have. There's been no Brookings analyst. There's been no analyst really expending any amount of energy being honest and just kind of looking at what's occurring and reporting it accurately. So I'm very interested in what everybody says about the book, and I'm always happy to discuss it online. So Allum, that goes for you as well. You're the author, and I definitely want to discuss the book online with you. And hopefully everybody will have a chance to read it. And also, please, as you read it, please do include me and tweet it out, because I'm very interested in your takes on it. This is the fastest rollable power in history, and I'm just so appreciative, Allum, that your contribution to this recording of history has just been so fantastic and really well written. So
thanks. I'm looking forward to your historical takes from this as well. The roll-up certainly seemed like a great way of describing what we're living through at the moment.
You were really helpful. You've been really helpful to this. And just so everybody knows, Allum is now the 5th person who's seen my log, who's seen my timeline. Pretty impressive, eh, Allum? What do you think?
Very impressive, yeah. It's a new way of doing history.
Yeah. So yours, I mean, I'm going to synthesize as much of what you wrote into this, because it's just great. I mean, it's just amazing what you've read and how much it just shows you in the last 5 years, really, they've had just this green light to just roll up everything under the cover of being resistant and anti-Trump, and it's just given them complete permission to go about some kind of bad things. I think we'll see how they play out. But again, Sierra Foothills Gal says book release date is September 22nd. That's correct. And McCad Guy again says thank you very much, and he purchased the book, so that's great. And I think we covered so much, and this was like the dinner that we had to have kind of in COVID times remotely. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Adam.
Yeah, again, and thank you so much. Everybody have a wonderful night, and thank you for joining us. Bye-bye.